adding in the animated shadow into our little bug creature here is not going to be a super hard or challenging activity. So if we look here, here's the bug. Here's his standing animation. You can see where it's just a little wiggle up and down of the legs. So it gets he's very antsy. And we can go back and see the walking animation. Or we get just a little bit of movement while he's walking. So those two movie clips are part of this main piece. Now, very quickly and easily we can construct a mirrored image that's blurred and grayed out of the same piece of artwork that will create the illusion of him possessing a shadow. And this is going to work until if we decide that he gets to jump. Because when a character jumps, the shadow stays on the ground while the character goes up in the air. So if you want your character to be able to jump, if you're going to build a platform style game, you will have to do this a little bit differently. But for now, this suffices for characters that are moving on a ground surface and are not going to be going airborne. So what we can do is you select the main artwork, and then I'm going to just copy the artwork. I'm going to add a new layer, and on that new layer I am going to now paste. So I'll click in the first frame to make sure it's active, and then I'm going to paste my beetle. Now if I just use normal paste, it puts it kind of up there. Don't like that. But if I use paste in place, it pastes it exactly where it copied from. So now I know that I put a copy of my artwork there. And if I turn off the lower layer, we can see it is right there. Now what I'm going to do with this particular bug is I'm going to, while he's selected, I will choose Modify, Transform, and I'm going to flip him vertically so it goes upside down. So we can now see that bug has been moved upside down. And then I'm going to take this selected bug, and I am going to take his brightness and pull his brightness way, way down. So he's become nearly black. We could make him white, going nearly black. After I choose brightness, then I'm going to choose advanced, and it will remember that brightness setting. And now I can pull its alpha down, creating the illusion of transparency, because cast shadows should always be transparent. They're never an opaque blackness, otherwise they don't seem convincing. So after I've done that, then what I want to do is with this shadow apply a filter to it. So I will apply blur, and I will now blur it out a little bit so it starts to look like it's being cast from his body. Now that I've done that, I can move. Let me undo that. And this is an occasion where I like to move off of the keyboard versus moving it by hand, so I can try to maintain some degree of position. And after I've done that, then what I'm going to do is switch to my transform tool, and I am going to pull it up from the bottom. Now if I just use the transform, it moves top and bottom. But if I just want to move from the bottom, if I hold down Option on the keyboard, I can grab one of the handles and just move that one side, leaving the other fixed. So I can start to create the illusion that that shadow is underneath his body. And now the bug has a shadow. The advantage of doing this method, if I go into that symbol, we'll see that even this modified one will still maintain that same animation, that little shaky animation that's part of my beetle, so that when I test my movie, we will see even the shadow is going up and down just like his body. So it starts to add a little bit more realism to it without me having to reanimate that. Now it's not perfect. The feet don't line up perfect. It's close. We'll also notice that it's going on top of his legs, so we probably need to pull this layer down so that it is pulled down a little bit. Now we could repeat all of that for the walking animation, or I'll go over to the walking animation and I will hit F6. So now I'm on the walking animation. We were on standing, now I'm on walking. And now if I click on the shadow at this point, we have a real nice option in my properties called swap. And currently that shadow is an instance of Beetle standing, but we want, because we're on the walking frame here, I want to use Beetle walking. So I will just double click on that, and now that changed it. So now this is an instance of Beetle walking here, and back at this point this is an instance of Beetle standing. So we now have the standing one and the walking one. So I didn't have to blur it, I didn't have to change its alpha or its brightness. I click on the symbol, go to swap, choose a new one. Recognizing that the stage is a finite space and isn't going to work really well for us, what we're going to need to do is to craft or construct a larger workspace so we have somewhere to be with our project. Now with this, if I go into my timeline here, currently I have my, I'm going to name this my player layer, and I'm going to add another layer. And on this layer, I'm going to label this layer this will become my background, so I will have to move it down. So in the main timeline, I've added a new layer. I'm going to call this background. Now currently this layer is above my player, and I will need to move it so that it is below the player, but for now, it's a starting point. What I need to do is I need to construct some artwork. So I can draw something, I can use rectangles, I can do whatever I want, but I want to make a background and now that background needs to be bigger. So currently, if you notice, my background is 3 times or approximately 3 times the size of my stage. And this is where we are going to run into some issues of how do we get something and make it really, really big when, as you can see, I've zoomed way out, so I'm now limited on what Flash is giving me of where I can draw. And there's a couple of strategies that we will employ for pulling that off, and I'll talk about some of the pros and cons with each of those in a moment. Now if I take this background that I have here, I can now fill it with the color of my choosing. You can see, okay, it's been filled with a nice mustardy, nasty color. And I'm going to just add some additional texture or marks on this, because in doing so, then I will be able to tell that the background is indeed moving behind my character. If it's all the same flat color, we'll really never know that the background is changing. And that's what we want to be able to see. So with this artwork that I have here, I'm going to convert it to a symbol, and it will be a movie clip. And I'll just call it background for now. So there it is. Now if I put the background layer underneath my bug or player, and we can see now it exists there. So now I have a layer of artwork and I have a layer for my player. If you remember that currently our player has an instance name assigned to it. So under properties it has an instance name. And previously it was called Bob. And now I have my background, and I'm going to give this an instance name of world, because we're going to need to be able to reference this item inside our movie clip. So we're going to create a slightly different dynamic and work with it. So after you have your world created. We're going to return to our actions, and we'll do some modifications here. So in my code, currently it's set up. So if I run my movie and we look at it, if I push the arrow keys, Bob is moving. But instead of moving Bob, I am going to change this line that says Bob is going to move. And I'm going to switch that to world. And forgot, wrong shortcut there. So we'll comment out the Bob one. Now my world is being adjusted instead of Bob. We'll still leave the walking, still leave the standing, still leave the flip on mine. So I'm using the cheater rotation Y versus having a walking left and walking right kind of thing because I'm doing the quick and dirty. But if I test this, and if I go, you'll notice now I'm hitting one direction. And we'll notice that Bob has decided to walk in a backwards direction. But to fix that, all we have to do is remember that, well, previously we told speed to, when I press right, we add to speed, and when we press left, we subtract speed, plus and minus. So we could modify our values up there, or we could, instead of adding speed x, we can subtract speed x, and that very possibly, now I'm going forward, going backward, and now it takes care of it. The only problem is I do fall off the edge of the world here after I go for a little, and then Bob just plummeted to his doom. And then someone steps on him and smashes him like the bug that he is. So what we need to do is to figure out how to put a few limits on there so that we don't move the world beyond its kind of point of no return. So I'm going to try putting our boundary check in one place. And it makes sense that here I'm modifying the position of the world. So maybe I don't want to modify it if the world has gone too far one way or the other. So I only modify it when it hasn't exceeded those boundaries. So we'll put a hard stop on the world when I hit the end of the wall. So we can use a simple conditional if world x is greater than, now right now I don't know exactly what value that's going to be, so I'm going to type some code in and then go replace that with some numbers. So if my world x is greater than my maximum amount, or actually we're going to, so if I'm less than my max, and we'll figure out what our max and min are in just a moment, and world is greater than my minimum. So we have to figure out what those max and min values are momentarily. And then if that's the case, I can highlight that line, move it up, move it over, get rid of the extra return. So if the world's x, what we're saying is if we're between these values, and we may want it to be ands instead of ors, but we'll play with it in a moment and see. So if we'll figure out what those values are. And we can do our min and max and figure it out by grabbing the world and moving it. So we notice that one value for the world, if I move to here so we can see we did hit the edge. If I look at x, it's 10. So we'll notice my x is at 10. But we can also see when I get to this edge, my x is now minus 1,376.05. I'll just say minus 1,375. That I can remember. So we have, for greater than minus 1,375, but we're less than 10. So this is noticing that the direction that this moves, because it registers 0 off of its top left corner, we've kind of hit our maximum value. Our maximum value really is going to be right around 0. And our minimum value is going to be right around the full width of the object. But this object is it's 1949 wide, but then we subtract the width of the stage, which happens to be 550, which is what gives us our approximate value that we're looking for on our max and min. So now, knowing those values, we can go back in and say, so if the world's x is less than 10, so we haven't gone too far one way, and the world, I think I want to switch this to and, not an or, and we can say and the world's x is greater than that negative amount, then move it. Otherwise, the world should stop. So if we look here, we can see I'm running, and now it's stopped. I've hit the end, and now we can't run off the world. Now, if I want the world to move further, so it's right up to the edge of Bob here, then we could do that. We can see now using the ands, we're trapped because the world moved one click too far. And I think, let's see if the or gives me a, no. So the or isn't going to work, so we have to use the and. So I have to format this slightly differently. I was hoping I didn't have to do that. Okay. Any thoughts? I have some ideas, but any thoughts? Going to modify so what we're going to do is we're going to send out have our program trace out the position of the world every time I press the key. And I'm going to get rid of these trace statements for now of which key I pressed, because we already know what keys are being pressed. So we're going to trace out the x position of the world every time I press a key. And it will tell me what is the position of the world. Now when we run this, we can see how the world is changing. And now we ended up moving, and if I scroll up through here, it went from -2 to 14.45. Because of our compounded speed, we were able to move that much. So we moved, and if you remember the code on it says if we have passed, so we were at 14. Well, if world x is less than 10, 14 is not less than 10, and the world x is greater than that, so we're running into a little problem that we're now stuck in this kind of no man's land if we can't get back. So what we need to do is we need to effectively reset our position to help take care of that. So looking at this right now, we've limited the world and its ability to be adjusted, But what we can do is, instead of only modifying it here, we can say when I press right, so when I'm going right, the world is going left, which is, this is part of that really. So if I'm moving Bob to the right, or creating the illusion of Bob moving to the right, that means the world is moving in a negative number. So if we say if right and the world x is greater than negative 1375, then it will change our speed. And I'm having some scroll issues there. And then we can say and if the world x is less than 10, change your speed. And what that does is that prevents it so that it's only locking the position based on the sliding movement of my character. But left is not, so if I'm pressing left or right, if I press left, it's only caring about the world's position that is impacted by pressing left. If I press right, it only cares about the position of the world when I'm pressing right. So it doesn't care about that other limit, so it doesn't lock out our position.